Hello, counseling students. Welcome to chapter 13. We have one more chapter to go and we are finished. All right, so this one we're going to be discussing counseling theory and practice, how to integrate the micro skills with multiple approaches. All right, so explore how the microskills framework is used across multiple theories of counseling and psychotherapy. Examine the background and practice of crisis trauma counseling and cognitive behavioral therapy, and become aware of the realities of suicide. All right, you're going to have the ability to engage in some of the basics of crisis and trauma counseling, ability to engage in some of the basics of a major approach to counseling and psychotherapy, which is the hugest and most widely used form of therapy, which is CBT. It is it's very efficacious. All insurance companies, that's the kind of go-to theory that insurance companies pay for. Does that mean that it's the only one you can use as a clinician? Absolutely not. But if you're going to be a clinician that accepts insurance, typically that is what they pay for. But you will, in your academia of taking counseling classes, you are going to learn so many approaches. And you will find the ones that work for you and the ones that you really, are drawn to based on, are you going to, work as a family therapist? Because then there's family systems, right? If you're going to work with, anxiety and depression, you have obviously CBT. There's a lot of other theories and approaches, but CBT is so huge. Think of it like the umbrella. And then within CBT, you've got so many different approaches within that theory. And then, of course, we're going to touch on crisis and trauma counseling. And you may find that, hey, I want to be a crisis and trauma counselor or therapist. So you'll take more classes related to that. So this just kind of touches on those areas and those competencies. All right, so the competencies you have developed with this book and through the lectures and through your own research should be able to enable you to understand and work with most counseling theories more quickly and competently. Although each theory offers a conceptual framework that differs from the others, again, it's not cookie cutter, so you'll find the approach that works with your particular client. So all theoretical approaches use microskills and the 5 stages presented in this book. Again, do you have to say, oh, I'm using the microskill or I'm using the 5 stages? No, it's just like anything you've learned in college and school and anything. You learn these things and then they're just there. We don't have to say, oh, I'm using this skill. It's just, you just do it. It's like riding a bike, right? You don't get on the bike and say, I'm riding the bike. You just do it. All right, so if you look at table 13.1 in your text, this reveals that each theory of counseling has a distinct pattern of microskill use. So you can go look at this in the book, take a look at all of the, what they talk about, open questions, closed questions, and then you can see on the side what type of theory goes with that. It's just a little snapshot. There's many in these microskills. All right. So when we look at philosophy, crisis counseling is pragmatic and action oriented. I mean, if you think about it in a logical standpoint, when you're in crisis, that needs immediate attention, right? It's not something we can wait. Sometimes you might even get, a message from a client. Like I just received a message that in the message, it was urgent. That means I need to drop whatever I'm doing and attend to that message. So again, that means action oriented. I do it now. All crisis counseling involves 2 phases: working through the initial trauma and then appropriate follow up and further counseling if needed. Because sometimes when you're in that crisis, it's in the moment. You deal with the initial issue trauma, and then when you're done, that might be all that, needs to, because again, it's action oriented and it's in that moment. All right, so the key methods. 5 stages and the micro skills that are, we're looking at. You've got safety, calming and caring, normalizing, debriefing the story, assessing strengths and resources, action and advocacy, and then follow up. So again, we're looking at 5 stages and the micro skills. All right, so other response models, the psychological first aid or PFA. Now notice when you're, down the road, when you start writing APA papers, this is what I'm teaching my psych students, is that anytime you want to you use an acronym, you write it out first. So psychological first aid, write it out in parentheses, then you put PFA. And then once you do that one time, then every other time you can just use the acronym. So just a little fun fact if you didn't already know. All right, so the PFA is an initial model of response to assist disaster survivors. The PFA goals are to assess risk, promote safety, stabilize survivors of disasters, and connect them with help and resources. The Red Cross and the APA provide PFA courses and extensive resources on their website. So if you go on the website, you can find a lot of information about that and how to kind of get set up with it. The triage assessment form is another tool developed to facilitate initial assessment and prioritization of care for disaster survivors. Use with cultural sensitivity and consideration of contextual factors. You want to note the goal of these strategies is to respond to the immediate needs. Again, this is all about immediacy because we're talking about crisis, and not to provide psychotherapy on site. So you're not there working as a therapist per se, right? You're there to provide your psychological knowledge in a crisis situation. So that's the reason that we use our skills in very different ways. We have to know, okay, am I having your normal weekly session or my check-in session, or am I in crisis counseling mode? So you yourself need to know when to switch things on, switch things off, and adapt. All right. Implications for your practice. So counselors need to be ready to help in crisis situations, establish trust and a working relationship. The basic listening skills and the 5-stage structure of the session help. Vicarious traumatization can happen. Each type of crisis is different, and adapt your approach accordingly. So if you want, what you could do, get a notebook, whatever you're using, and just look at that bullet by bullet. So counselors need to be ready to help in crisis situations. How do we get there? Well, we get there through training. We get there through experience, through practicum, through our internships. Crisis, it doesn't mean that when you're in a crisis situation that you're like, oh, superwoman, superman, and you can do this, because, or you can, you're still a human being. But when you learn the skills, it teaches you how to be able to work in that situation. All right, establish trust and a working relationship. So again, write that down. What does that mean to you? How do you establish that? What will you do to be able to get there? Again, the basic listening skills and the 5-stage structure of the session help. Again, you're going to write that down. What does that mean for you? How do I get there so that when I'm in a crisis situation, how am I going to be able to assist? All right, and so on. All right, so crisis counseling first session transcript. All right, what do you think about this? So in the text, you're going to see this example. So what do you think about this example involving a family in a big city dealing with the loss of their apartment after a fire? Again, you're going to start thinking about, what do you think about the example? Did the counselor, Angelina Knox, demonstrate appropriate skills during her meeting with the mother, Delasay Aria? So, you're going to be, again, you're a counseling student and you're assessing, you're using your clinical judgment that you have thus far. And, When you have clinical judgment, there is common sense to it. There's intuition. There's a lot of things that come into place. So use what you have within you and what you've learned to, okay, would I do this? Would I do something differently? Just think of it like that. So what worked well? And then what would you have done differently? And some people might say, I wouldn't have done anything. I mean, there's going to be something that you personally would have done differently because you are a unique individual to yourself and people think differently. All right, so review research literature to understand factors that might lead to a suicide attempt. It's really important to become well versed in suicide and understanding what it is and what it is not. So kind of dispelling the myths about it, over exaggeration, whatever the case is. Again, in my psychology class, I go in depth about what it is and what it is not. So, look at the literature, look at your own things about it. Just do the research. Maintain a watchful eye for suicide potential, providing immediate crisis support and ensuring a careful referral with client follow-up. That's important. Look for strengths and resources to build on, both for the here and now and or of the interview. Again, just whatever you want to call it, and for the long-term safety of the client. So it's important to find resources in that here and now because that's immediacy. What can I do to assist now? What is going to help this person get through this moment? Then after that, because sometimes the moment is all they have. So we want to make sure we get them through the moment. Then we want to start looking at the long-term safety of the client and getting them to where they get to that, sense of peace and knowledge and, okay, when I'm feeling this, I know what resources I have. All right, recognize the 3 key warning signs of impending suicide. So there's the actual threat to hurt or kill oneself. So I'm like, things have been said, right? And there's also underlying things that haven't been said. And that's where a lot of people are like, looking back, they're like, oh my gosh, the signs were there. So it's just use that intuition that you have within yourself. Seeking access to pills, guns, or other routes. Do they have these methods? And then talking or writing about death, dying, or suicide. The thing that's really important to understand with suicide is that it's important to be direct with empathy, right? And with, it's all in how we approach things. So we don't want to make someone feel bad or any type of way about their feelings, but we want to be direct. And are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking of taking your life? We don't want to dance around it. That's something we don't do. So we don't want to tiptoe and just, I'm really worried that we don't want to do that. We need to be direct. We are the source of strength. We teach others to be the source of strength. So that's important. Ask key questions and avoid asking the why questions. I think we all know by now, I am very big on the why going away. This is in the text. So this is literally in the text. Ask key questions and avoid asking the why question. In this case, 99.9% they don't truly know why, because in the moment it's immediate, sometimes it's impulsive, right? A lot of times it's an impulsive decision, because if they knew why, they really knew why, more than likely they would do something to get what they needed, right? The help. So we don't want to ask like, well, why are you feeling like this? Why blah blah blah? It's very counterproductive. All right, so suicide in the US, here's a chart that just kind of breaks it down, nation, males, females, etc., the number per day, the rate, percentage of deaths. And again, this is, probably book was published 2023. So we're going to look at the data is obviously a little bit before that. All right, so let's look at CBT. All right, so the philosophy behind CBT is an information processing system. So that means cognition is all about thoughts. And we use CBT to engage with our clients and looking at those illogical thought patterns, the thoughts that, okay, it makes sense to them, but it's not reality. So it's looking at how they are processing their information. So cognitive activity affects behavior. So if you, again, really train yourself to think, cognitive or cognition is thinking. So thinking activity affects your behavior, right? Thoughts are your behavior, or thoughts can influence your behavior. But remember, we are not our thoughts. And that's where a lot of people do get tripped up. Even your own self from time to time, we have a thought sometimes, right? And we think we are the thought. So it's very important to understand that that activity does affect our behavior. Cognitive activity may be monitored and altered. So you can monitor that, especially as a therapist. You monitor your clients, cognitive activity, what they're thinking, asking the questions, and then being able to help alter their behaviors through therapy and through work. Desired behavior change may be affected through cognitive change. Again, what we're doing is we're mentally rewiring the system to start to think logically and rationally. All right, so here are some specifics. A base of cognitive response as key to change. Time limited with specific goals. That's what I like about CBT is we are focused on a goal and it's time limited. It doesn't mean that you don't can't go back into therapy. It's just it's very targeted. And the reason, again, managed care and insurance paying for so many sessions, CBT is the best theory for that. A sound relationship is needed, but it is not central. So again, when you are working with a client, it's, you want to have that relationship with your client, but the idea behind the theory is that it's not central. We are looking at a logical thought patterns and changing and rewiring. A collaborative venture between counselor and client that uses a Socratic question and answer style. We are the questioners. Question, question, question. Again, that doesn't mean over questioning. We want to make sure we are appropriately questioning, but sometimes we ask questions and our clients want to ask us questions back to kind of get their own answer without figuring out their own answer. So then what we do is we re-question so that they come up with their own answer. Based on aspects of Stoic philosophy. So it is not things, but what one thinks of things that counts. So kind of stop, think about that, say that to yourself. Structured and directive. Again, that's what makes it a very good theory. It has structure and it's directive in nature. Based on an educational model, relies on induction, and homework is essential. It's kind of a very big thing with CBT is homework. And you as the clinician, it is very important. It will be very important for you to learn right homework, right? Because not all homework works for people. Not everybody wants to be thrown a worksheet and say, fill this out, bring it back to me. So make it work for the client and make it appropriate to them. I make up so much of my own homework with CBT techniques, but it's stuff I make up. So you have to have that connection that they want to do it and that it's relevant for them. All right, so what do you think about the CBT session with Carlos and Renee? So in your text, you will see that there is a vignette, um, going through CBT. So when you look at that, what do you think of that? What basic CBT techniques did you identify? Did the client make any progress? Did you note any progress being made through that interaction? What other techniques that you've learned so far did you identify in the session? Because again, CBT is not just one, it's one of many. And it's also a big umbrella for other things. And then what would you have done differently? It's very important, no matter what therapist you might be working with, or if you're in therapy yourself, you can think, well, this is good. I would have done it this way though. And that's okay because you're growing in your own style. All right, action plan and homework. Fifth stage of the micro skills interview has long been action. The final part of the session needs to include a formulation of a concrete action plan based on what was learned in the session. Now, your treatment plan encompasses these kinds of things. What we're going to go over, what are the strategies, how are we going to get to this plan, how are we going to get to the end of the road with therapy. So action planning, including homework and follow-up, are essential parts of any treatment plan because they encourage clients to take home and act on what was learned in the session. Homework is going to be very different for everyone. Again, what you want to learn, the takeaway from this is not to be a textbook therapist. There is no copy paste. There is no, hey, I'm going to use this with this client and that client and that client and that client. People are going to need different things because they have different flow. So find out what your flow is, find out what your client's flow is, and then do that accordingly. All right, more emphasis on behavior change is likely to be a focus. As thoughts change, so do behaviors. You're going to notice that within your clients. As their thoughts change, hopefully for the better, their behavior is going to change for the better. Treatment in later sessions potentially will include other interventions. So you may start with CBT, and then you might move to more, different eclectic approaches that maybe are CBT based, or maybe they're not. So you'll notice as you learn, you'll have your big old toolbox of strategies. You'll learn what works for your clients. Exercise, that's a go-to. That will be central in treatment planning, assuming the client is interested and motivated. We don't ever want to tell our client to exercise, right? We don't, that is a cookie cutter approach. Okay, exercise, journal, do this, do that. We don't do that. We can ask them, how is your activity level? What do you do, if anything, for exercise? Do you engage in a sport? Do you do aerobics? Do you go to the gym? Do you walk? Do you play pickleball? Whatever the case is, find out, if anything, if they exercise. We want to incorporate that. Some people may have a disability or something where they can't run, right? Or they can't jog or sprint or maybe even walk. So we have to find, what works for them. And sometimes we have to do our own homework of, hey, my client has this issue. We want to give them psychoeducation, right? Hey, let's talk to your doctor. Talk to your doctor about what activities can you engage in. There's chair exercising, sitting in a chair, movement. So again, we we do our own research sometimes, and then we say, hey, I found this technique, I found this exercise, I want to share it with you, and maybe talk this over with your doctor and see if this is appropriate, right? That is what we do as therapists. We guide, we provide, we give information. That is psychoeducation as well. All right, so we end with micro skills and multiple approaches, touched on suicide, multicultural issues, and then of course end with portfolio of competencies and personal reflection. So again, I tell you, it's getting smaller and smaller, and we have got one more chapter to go and you are done. And you have noticed that we have just been building upon and I've said from the beginning, things are going to seem redundant. You're going to hear this same thing about multiculturalism and um, attending and listening and all of the micro skills. But when you look back from day one to the end, you see, oh, everything was building. And now when you go to your next class and then your next one, everything is just going to build and then really hone in. So hope you enjoyed that little tidbit of information, and I will see you in the final chapter. So again, look at those vignettes. Think about how you would respond to that, how you would do things, maybe the same, differently, your own approaches. And then I will see you in the final chapter, chapter 14. All right. Have a great weekend, whenever you are listening to this. All right. Peace.